Travers Day card. It's always one of my favorite cards of the year. I feel like this, Belmont Day, Breeders' Cup days, those are the three best cards. Maybe you want to throw in Derby Day there too. But Travers Day's got 5 straight grade 1s from race 9 to race 13. There's a pick 5 that links all of them together. And we got to start with the big race because we've previewed it somewhat for the last couple of weeks, and it did not disappoint. We got 8 horses. Normally you'd be like, only 8 horses for a $1.25 million race. Dude, could you find a 50-1 shot in this race? Could you even find a 20-1 shot in this race? Everybody in this race has a legitimate case to be made for them. You know, Batten Down is probably going to be the longest shot at like 20-something to 1. And all he's done is run 3 straight 93 buyers. He was 3rd in the Jim Dandy, won the Ohio Derby by Tappet at a close hatches. He's going to be the big long shot. So that tells you the star power that we have. The conversation has to start and end with, I think, Thorpedo Anna, because we just don't get this that often in racing, to have these top fillies go up against the boys and see what they're truly made of, because she was obviously so much better than the fillies. The Alabama was like a kind of a snooze. I mean, it was an exciting race on the track, but a snooze in terms of like star power. Thorpedo Anna, thank you, Kenny McPeak, for putting her in this spot. She drew the rail. Mm-hmm. So that can be a little bit tricky. There is a bunch of other speed. You got Unmatched Wisdom. Batten Down's got some pace. Obviously, Dornock's going to try to gun and go. Fierceness from the far outside. But the good thing about Thorpedo Anna is she doesn't need the lead. She just has been up close to the pace in the last couple of races because that's how it shook out. And, you know, she went to the lead in the Kentucky Oaks. I think surprisingly. I think most people did not expect her to be on the lead, and she went wire to wire. You go back in her past performances, she's 6 for 7 with 1 second, and she's won from 7th, from 4th, from 3rd, from 2nd. It's going to be tricky, though, John, navigating a good spot from the rail, because she's not going to catch anybody by surprise. This isn't some filly that has like a 12-1 shot. She's 3-1 morning line. So the other riders are going to be aware of her. They might try to make it a little bit tight going into the first turn. It's going to be on Brian Hernandez to work out a good spot. But if there's any filly that I think can do that from that spot, it's her.
Well, and Joe, you bring up the depth of talent in this race, from Thorpedo Anna, you know, the one horse, all the way to the outside horse, Fierceness. And it really, to me, it comes down to a couple of questions. Thorpedo Anna is going to have it, you know, this is going to be her toughest race of her career. As well it should in the Grade 1 Travers. You're looking at Fierceness. Which Fierceness shows up? Is it the Fierceness of the Jim Dandy, Florida Derby, and Breeders' Cup Juvenile, or is it the Fierceness of the Kentucky Derby, the Holy Bull, and the Champagne? You don't know. I mean, he's about as schizophrenic of a horse as there is out there. And his his racing lines show that. If it's the off on pattern, then he would be off this Travers. And there's some rumors out there that are saying that he's, you know, hitting the racetrack and he's not 100% sound, but you know, nobody knows. Nobody really knows that that's the case. And I think it's all, you know, speculation at this point. You got Dornock, who's, you know, won 2 in a row. And if you take out the Kentucky Derby race, he's just been improving every single race. Honor Marie is a horse that we haven't spoken about, Joe, coming off a layoff, has similar racing style to Sierra Leone in the race. But he's the quote unquote fresh horse of the race, and they're putting blinkers on. So maybe they're trying to induce a little bit more speed in that Son of Honor code. But to me, I think that the race sets up really nicely for Sierra Leone, who in his 7th race, he's improving every single race, Joe. He's a Fasig-Tipton grad, $2.3 million purchase. But if you look at his numbers, whether it's the buyer numbers or the sheet numbers or the thorough manager, whatever you know group you want to use as far as a measuring stick, he has actually improved every single race, which is not easy to do at this high level. So I think things set up for him, you know, and if there's speed out there, which there's an abundance of speed in a race like this, I think it's going to set up for a horse like him if Pratt can navigate the traffic and kind of part the seas in this race. I said Sierra Leone and you rolled your eyes. What's that about, bud?
Well, listen, how many times have I heard that a race sets up for Sierra Leone and he doesn't win enough? No, I mean, he's obviously very, very talented. He shows up every time, runs his race, but I've heard that before. Mm-hmm. And he lost at 4-5 last time. He lost at 8-5 in the Belmont. He's just one of these horses that leaves himself too much to do. And yeah, I think there will be a quick pace, but there's other closers in here. Like you said, Honor Marie has got a good closing kick. He's going to be heard from, I think, down the stretch. Corporate Power is a little bit of an interesting long shot. He had to be chasing Unmatched Wisdom last time through a slow pace. If he gets some pace to run at, I think he's a little interesting for Shug. Listen, I'm not here to knock on Sierra Leone. He's a nice horse. He shows up every time. Just getting a little tired of this race sets up for him, and then he just comes a little bit too late.
Right. Joe, let me ask you a question. I'm going to have you put your breeder's hat on. Okay. Say that now you're in charge of breeding mares. Okay. Everything else being equal. Would you breed your mare to Sierra Leone, or would you breed your mare to Arabian Night, who just retired after 6 starts?
That's the proverbial loaded question, I think. Yeah, Sierra Leone, because he has staying power. Like he's already run more times than Arabian Night did, and he's only halfway through his 3-year-old season. So, and he's by gun runner, and he is proven that he can go a route of ground. I'm going to say Sierra Leone for 500, Alex.
Okay, all right, that's fair. I mean, that's the answer that I would give. Also, there is a group of breeders in and around the country that would say, hey, Sierra Leone was a $2.3 million yearling. Arabian Night was a $2.4 million 2-year-old. He being Arabian Night had more speed and was earlier developing than Sierra Leone. Therefore, his foals should get earlier speed. But I'm in the same camp you are in, which is you go with a horse that's sounder. You go with a horse that has proven it over a greater distance at a higher level, like the Jim Dandy, the Belmont, the Kentucky Derby, the Bluegrass, et cetera, than breeding to a horse like Arabian Night. Not that, Arabian Night isn't going to be commercial, because a lot of those horses that have early speed and are that good looking, get a lot of mares, at least in the first year. But it's something that I know I kind of, backdoored that conversation into an important race like the Travers. But it is something that people are talking about, which is the sustainability of the breed and whether or not we should be breeding to horses that only run 5-6 times in the course of their careers. We can have that conversation ad nauseum at another time. But actually I was reading what Tinky was writing, was tweeting. And look, we've bred a lot of mares and we've bought some Uncle Mo's. And for the most part, it's harder to keep them sound than it is other types of horses. So, everyone can do what they want to do. We're going to shy away from breeding to an unproven horse, an unsound horse, as it were, like an Arabian Night versus, a number of horses in here. I mean, Dornoch has run 9 times and is improving as he gets older. You look at Batten Down, who has just bred up the wazoo and is really coming into his own. So I think we're going to see some stallions coming out of the Travers that 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to look back and say, oh yeah, the 24 Travers, that was a jumping off point for all of these horses to meet and kind of round one before they all meet in the Breeders' Cup Classic, because that's where the majority of these horses are going.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could add like 2-3 older horses, and this would be a Breeders' Cup Classic field, I think.
Yep.
And it would really not need much more than that. Yeah, it's a good point that, I would love to have Tinky back on to talk about something like that, because, that's the only way, if you subscribe to that theory that, horses that don't run a certain amount of times produce less sound horses over time, the only way to have any kind of guardrail against that is to institute some kind of rule that says you have to have a dozen starts, et cetera, et cetera. But right. I'll venture to guess that the Stallion owners and the Stallion farm owners are not going to be down with that. I mean, but it's
right.
It is a little frustrating to see horses go to the breeding shed after 6 starts. Like, obviously, people are going to yell at me and say, "Hey, what about Flightline?" Flightline never really had like the super unsoundness issues. He had like little nagging things here and there. But yeah, I obviously would have loved to see him run more too. But he should be the exception, not the norm.
Right. And it's up to the breeding, populace to make those decisions about to whom they're going to breed. If they insist on breeding to horses that haven't run that often, or only show brilliance and can't have staying power into their 3-year-old, 4-year-old year, if they even make it that long, that's their choice. But it is going to beget other foals that maybe have issues. It's not guaranteed. I mean, Vekoma, who is killing it as far as a stallion, a freshman sire right now. If you look at him and his, the way it was taught to me, front legs are supposed to be like clock hands, from 12 to 6. Okay. You look at Vekoma, even as established as he was as a racehorse, running, and he only ran like 8 or 9 times, but as winning the races he did, if you look at his legs, they're not 12 to 6. This clock is broken. It's in all different directions. Right. But
a famous paddler.
Right. But his foals, for the most part, have come out and they've been pretty correct, or more importantly, they track correctly. They do it. So, there's all kinds of arguments that you can make pro or con, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't surprise me to see, sounder horses beget sounder foals.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is, you mentioned like a lot of these horses are probably going to become stallions in the Travers. I hope it's a couple of years from now.
Right.
That's another thing. And we're going off kind of on a tangent here, but whatever. That's what this show is about, tangents. I just hate seeing so many horses retire after their 3-year-old season.
Right.
Like it's just a bummer. There has to be some kind of staying power, I think, for horses, for people to truly be able to enjoy them, for you to be able to build fan bases. Like I get it in like the odd scenario where like, Justifier was a Triple Crown winner and then he had an injury and it's like, well, what are we going to do? Let's retire. That was a bummer, but I kind of get it, at least for a horse that's that valuable. But you got a lot of 3-year-olds like, this one just popped into my head. I don't mean to single anybody out, but like Cyberknife. Mm-hmm. Didn't he like win the Haskell and then disappear into the breeding shed like a couple months later?
Right.
Like I just hope that some of these horses at least are back to run as 4-year-olds, because it is an awesome crop.
Right.
And God knows this game needs some good older horses to fill these big time stakes races. And thankfully Arthur's Ride has now burst onto the scene. But before that, it was very bleak in the older horse division. It's been like that for, I think, most of the last decade.
Right. Well, it's so, that is the golden pot at the end of the rainbow, is when you get a horse, good colt, well-bred, decently bred, what have you, wins a grade 1, all of a sudden they're worth so much more. And you're trying to do everything you can not to get the tarnish off the apple. But you gotta run these horses. That being said, if you get a stallion deal, it's a shit ton of money. I mean, you have to respect that. And there are costs that go into it. Like, let's just say the best case scenario for Sandman, who's a son of Tappet. Okay. He ends up doing something, remarkable and wins a grade 1 in the course of his career. It's going to be really hard to keep him on the racetrack at that point, for the simple reason that like the insurance alone, of a $10-20 million valuation on a horse is obscene. You're running basically to pay premiums. Is what it comes down to. And I think I can't speak for everyone who was involved in Flightline, but I think that's what happened with Flightline. It just got to be too cost prohibitive to keep him running, and he had a stellar undefeated record.
Yeah, I know. It's easy for me to say it's not my money, but I know, just speaking from a fan's perspective, like I miss Jess Jackson. Mm-hmm. I miss Curlin running until he was 5-6 years old.
Right.
Him trying him on the grass, and you just don't. It's easier said than done, but I think occasionally we need some sportsmen who are willing to race horses at least into their 4-year-old season. You have to race them till they're 6, but can we not shuttle them off to stud like after they win one half-assed grade 1 as a 3-year-old? I mean, we're not hurting for stallions here, people.
That's
like
true.
we're full up. So it doesn't seem like we need that many new stallions just because they, like I said, they won one sort of grade 1 race. Let's move on to a couple of other races.
Wait, what race were we talking about there? I forgot. It was like 10 minutes ago.
The Haskell,
the Travers. What?
We started talking about the Travers,
right. And boy, we meandered.
It turned into my anti-Cyberknife rant.
Great. No t-shirts or hats from them. Thanks, Joe.
Didn't wake up thinking I would be talking about Cyberknife today on the show, but that's why we love what we do, man. It can take us anywhere.